You've probably heard it a dozen times in the last few months. Inflation is cooling. The news keeps telling you that prices are stabilizing, that things are getting better, that we're turning a corner on the cost of living crisis. And yet, when you look at your bank account, something doesn't add up. You're still broke. Your paycheck still barely stretches to the end of the month. You're still choosing between buying groceries and filling up your gas tank. So what's actually going on? Why does inflation cooling feel like absolutely nothing has changed for your wallet? The answer is more complicated and more frustrating than you might think. And if you want to understand how your money really works in this economy, you're going to want to stick around. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss insights like this. Let's start with what inflation cooling actually means. When economists say inflation is cooling, they're talking about the rate of change. It's not that prices are going down. It's that prices are going up more slowly than they were before. Think about it this way. If inflation was rising at 10% a year, and now it's rising at 4% a year, technically, inflation is cooling. But that doesn't mean you're paying less for milk. It means milk is getting more expensive, just not as quickly as it was. That's a huge distinction that the media glosses over constantly. Here's the real problem nobody wants to talk about. You don't care about the rate of change. You care about your actual purchasing power right now, today, in this moment. If eggs cost $4 a dozen and they were $2 a dozen 2 years ago, you don't feel relief because the price of eggs is only going up by 30% annually instead of 60% annually. You feel broke because you're paying double for eggs. The damage to your wallet was already done during the period of high inflation. Cooling inflation doesn't undo that damage. Let's look at some real numbers. Since 2020, cumulative inflation has been somewhere around 20 to 25%, depending on what you're measuring. That means the average price across the economy has gone up by roughly a quarter. Your salary probably hasn't. That's the core issue. Inflation has already happened to you. You've already lost purchasing power. Now that inflation is cooling, you're not gaining anything back. You're just losing it more slowly. It's the difference between drowning quickly and drowning slowly. Technically, one is better, but you're still drowning. Another thing that's really important to understand is that inflation hasn't cooled evenly. Yes, energy prices have come down from their peaks, but housing costs are still through the roof. Groceries are still expensive. Your rent or your mortgage is probably higher than it was 2 years ago, and it's unlikely to go back down. These are the things that actually eat up your paycheck every single month. These are the necessities. So when you hear that inflation is cooling, you might be thinking about energy prices. But what's actually happening in your budget is that housing and food are still crushing you. If you're finding this information useful, please hit the like button. It helps us reach people who need to hear this. There's also a wage problem that nobody talks about enough. Even though inflation is cooling, your wages probably haven't caught up to the inflation that already happened. A lot of workers got raises in the last couple of years, but most of those raises were smaller than the cumulative inflation rate. So even with a raise, you're worse off than you were before. You might feel like you got a bump in pay, but in terms of what you can actually buy with that money, you've gone backwards. And if you work in an industry where wages are sticky, where employers resist raising pay, then you've just lost money, period. Then there's the issue of interest rates. The Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates to fight inflation. That's how cooling inflation happens. But higher interest rates affect you in ways that inflation cooling doesn't help with. If you want to buy a house, that mortgage is more expensive now. If you want to buy a car, that loan costs more. If you want to use a credit card, that interest rate is higher. If you're lucky enough to have savings, sure, you're getting better returns on a high-yield savings account. But most people don't have enough savings for that to matter. Most people are living paycheck to paycheck, and higher interest rates just make it harder to borrow money when you need it. So cooling inflation doesn't help you with any of that. Let's talk about what cooling inflation actually does help with. It helps asset owners. If you own real estate, you benefit from inflation cooling because your debt becomes easier to manage while your asset holds its value or appreciates. If you own stocks, you benefit because lower inflation can push stock prices up. If you have a fixed-rate mortgage, you benefit because your debt payment stays the same, while inflation cooling stops eroding your real purchasing power going forward. But if you're renting, if you don't own assets, if you're living hand to mouth, inflation cooling does almost nothing for you. The system is rigged so that the benefits of cooling inflation flow to people who already have money, and the costs of inflation fall on people who don't. Here's another angle that's important. Cooling inflation doesn't mean stable prices. It means slower price increases. So businesses can still raise prices. They're just not raising them as fast. That's great for profit margins. It's not great for your wallet. You'll still see your grocery bill go up. You'll still see your utility bill go up. You'll still see your subscription services go up. It'll just happen a little more slowly. But over time, slower increases are still increases. They still add up. They still reduce your purchasing power. They just do it in a way that's less noticeable, which is actually convenient for the people making these decisions. The first thing is to understand that cooling inflation is not the same as your situation improving. Your situation improves when your wages go up faster than prices are rising. That's the math you need to care about. Right now, for most people, wages are not rising faster than prices. Even with cooling inflation, you're still falling behind. You need to find ways to increase your income faster than inflation is increasing. That might mean asking for a raise and negotiating hard. It might mean developing a skill that's in high demand. It might mean starting a side business. It might mean moving to a lower cost of living area. But you can't just sit back and hope that cooling inflation solves your problem, because it won't. The second thing you need to do is be really careful about debt. With higher interest rates, debt is more expensive than it was before. If you can avoid taking on new debt, you should. If you already have variable rate debt, you should think about whether you can refinance or consolidate it at a fixed rate before things get worse. Credit card debt, personal loans, variable rate mortgages. These are all things that are costing you more money in a higher interest rate environment. And cooling inflation doesn't help with any of that. The third thing is to focus on assets that actually protect you from what's happening. Real assets like real estate or commodities can hold value during inflation. Stocks can grow faster than inflation. Your own human capital, your education, your skills, your ability to earn more money, that's the most important asset of all. If you're not investing in yourself, if you're not learning new things, if you're not positioning yourself for higher income, then cooling inflation is just going to keep hitting you year after year. Finally, let's talk about what this all means for your financial future. The economy is fundamentally broken for people without assets. If you're renting, if you don't own anything, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, then you're completely at the mercy of inflation and interest rates and wage growth. And right now, wage growth is not keeping up. You need to get yourself into a position where you own assets. You need to own real estate or stocks or a business or something that can appreciate faster than inflation. That's the only way to win in this system. It's not fair, but it's how it works. And understanding that is the first step to actually doing something about it. So the next time you hear that inflation is cooling, don't celebrate. Don't think that your problems are solved. Think about what that actually means for your specific situation. Think about whether your wages are keeping up. Think about whether you're building assets. Think about whether you're actually getting ahead or just losing money more slowly. That's the real question. That's what actually matters. And if you're honest with yourself, the answer is probably that you're still broke, because inflation cooling doesn't fix a system where most people don't own assets and don't have wages that keep up with the cost of living. If this video resonated with you, please like it and subscribe for more videos about how money and the economy actually work. And leave a comment telling me what's been the hardest expense in your life since inflation picked up. I read every comment, and I want to hear your real story.